When you look across the sectors, it's quite interesting to try to understand how much commonality there is in product development across the sectors versus how much is very sector specific. So I think when you look at the regulatory environment, the impact of change, the cost of change to a regulated product, there's some sectors where that will be prohibitively expensive, so you'll not do that. Others where actually the whole design cycle and the product launch cycle is so dynamic that your next product will have the design change in it anyway. So I think there are quite significant differences between the sectors. Having said that, a lot of the principles that underpin the whole product development process are actually quite similar. They're just applied in a different environment. Another thing I think that we'll see in the future is a blurring of the sectors. So I think historically when we've seen electronics being applied to mechanics to improve the functionality of products, then we've seen burgeoning software and a whole range of products to further increase functionality. Now we're looking at the integration of wireless communications onto products, and then the use of products to sell a whole range of services on the products. So the whole product system is changing, and some of that requires technologies and products from other sectors either to be re-engineered or to be transported across into a new sector, and then it needs to comply with the regulatory environment that resides within that sector.
In the consumer products sector, the specific challenges that they face are to do with innovation. Consumer products are driven by being more innovative and generating products rapidly that meet changing market need. But actually that's almost just a license to operate. Every consumer product company needs to have that ability to recognize the market need and respond quickly and beat the competition to it. So the new technologies that are coming into play are related to making things more healthy, more sustainable, as the market need changes more towards those particular needs. And we're thinking of things like functional foods and more sustainable products and more sustainable packaging and things like that. And those require new tools, new science, new technology as ways of doing it. But they also force consumer products to work in a slightly different way, in a slightly different sector that they're not used to. Functional foods is a good example of that, because functional food is a cross between a more pharmaceutical medical device sector and a food and drink consumer product sector. So what does the food and drink company do to cope with the regulations that come into place in the pharmaceutical sector? There's also an increasing trend towards regulation for consumer products. And here we're particularly thinking of things like children's toys, where the need to provide a level of safety and assurance that you've developed the right thing and it's got the right level of quality and it won't do any harm is becoming more and more important. And then the final thing is a response to the recession. So what we're seeing with some of our consumer products clients is that they're facing a brand erosion, if you like, where the consumers are trading down from the premium brands with the good profit margins that have driven the growth of those consumer products companies down to more supermarket-owned brands. There is evidence and market research that those clients are finding, which means that it's unlikely that the consumer will trade back up to the premium brands at the end of the day. And so the consumer products companies have to come up with a way of addressing this problem and retaining the brand value that they have. And one way they're looking at this is personalization. So they're trying to figure out, how do I give more value back to my consumer by making the product that I've developed more personal to them? And the implication of this on product development is massive. Because after all, if I want my own personal individual product, then it has to be tailored to me, both in the manufacturing and in the design process. And how do the consumer products respond to that in a way that still maintains a profit margin?
Firstly, to do with the emergence, I think, of fundamental platforms for a lot of what we do in our everyday lives as consumers and/or as people that need help from the health system or assisted living environments. There are fundamental platforms that I think product developers are going to have to link with and build upon and integrate into, or actually create new ones themselves. When I say platforms, I'm thinking of things like your home, like the home environment, the built environment, the home hub that you may or you will have in the future. There'll be communications and media and entertainment and health, assisted living type facilities and functions and features will all go through that same central home hub, and that will be built into new homes, and there'll be certain big players who will be responsible for creating those platforms and putting those platforms in place on a sort of a global scale. The second big feature, moving on from platforms, are to do with services. In the future, people increasingly are going to want and be prepared to pay for solutions to unmet needs and wants. And that almost certainly means that in the future you will be developing a product in association with developing a service that will be delivered hand in hand with the product. It will be a product-service combination that meets a need, that delivers a result. Another big factor that we shouldn't forget about is the importance of the Asian markets. Let's take an example of Medtronic and the pacemaker type devices and services, product-service combinations that they provide. They couldn't put their products into the Chinese market in the same way in which they're put into the Western markets, because the infrastructure isn't there to support them. They couldn't support the patients and follow up and maintain a state of health and safety to support that patient. So they've had to leap to a completely new set of technologies, which has driven a whole new set of products which are remotely programmed and reprogrammed and monitored, and patients no longer have to come into clinics to have routine checkups, because they just couldn't do that in China. They were forced into another model because of the infrastructure. And I think lastly, there's the environment, environmental issues, the sustainability issues, which represent both opportunities and threats. And the medical devices sector is not going to be exempt from that. Maybe it gets a little bit of time bought. We saw that with phasing out of CFCs for asthmatic inhalers. Yes, those were given more time than the refrigerators and other products that were using and releasing lots of CFCs into the environment, but that doesn't go on forever, and there has to be a response. People are going to be concerned about the amount of plastic waste that's generated and thrown out as a result of medical devices.
Well, in the electronics world, things have been changing considerably. So there are very rapid development cycles with new products expected out every few months, rather than longer than that. And whilst the tools and skills have developed, there are still some costly decision points. So, for example, tape out for a custom chip means the world stops whilst fabrication happens. There are new technical capabilities out there. For example, the feature size goes down and down every year, and that means that you can't reliably simulate the design that you're creating. You can't test it until you have gone through that expensive fabrication stage. So the costs are very high before you get there, and disappointment is commensurately low if you fail to meet any of the objectives in the actual design. There are hundreds of man-years now go into products of this sort, so you're building on the shoulders of giants at all times, and whilst you can offset some of the risks, you're still taking big, fairly high-risk steps in order to stay ahead.
Well, the automotive industry is really fascinating, and it has a set of unique characteristics which make the challenge almost insurmountable. So the three things that are driving the development are being market-led, meeting the needs of a customer, and often a customer can't articulate those needs. If you think about most of the latest cars that are out there, they were often very new concept, a Range Rover for example, or the People Carrier, both of those very new concepts in cars. So it's being market-led, understanding the client's needs. There's then about manufacturing efficiency. These cars will typically last for 5 to 7 years, the platforms for longer. So if you don't design them to be easy and cost-effective in manufacture, your in-building cost, which is just not really sensible. And then the third element is time to market, being in the market when you wish to be, predictably with a high-quality product. Now those are the three main drivers, but of course the product itself is very complex. It's not one or two components, it's thousands of components, all of which have to be extremely reliable, both immediately and long term. So a very complicated problem to solve. And typically in automotive, the product development processes are very rigorous, very documented, ways of getting hundreds of engineers to work together in a collective aim